Canon Puncture Show, episode 129. Game Advocates. Beat or deet?
Beat.
Beat to quarters.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Canon Puncture Show. This is Rich here, bringing you another one of our Game Advocates episodes. I am happy to have on the mics with me one of the co-hosts from the now finished and excellent RPG Haven podcast. Also, he's from the Reludo, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but it's Esperanto, so I guess it's all right. Also from Reludo is Ryan Shelton. Welcome to the show, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Rich. Thank you.
Oh, good. So excited. So now I've had Walker and you. I've had both members of the RPG Haven podcast, therefore upgrading the Canon Puncture status in the podcast history and laurels. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, wow. It's an honor.
But I'm not here just to stroke your ego. I'm here to ask you about some game you wanted to talk about, right?
Yeah. I'd like to talk about a game called Beat to Quarters.
Oh, that's the college drinking game, right?
Yeah, no, it's not actually. It's a game of Napoleonic naval adventure.
Huh. Okay.
The actual kind of subtitle is A Game of Action and Intrigue in the Age of Sail.
All right. Well, what's this game about?
Well, it's the naval adventure. If you've read any of the Horatio Hornblower books or Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey Maturin series or any of the other naval adventure books in that genre, that's exactly what the game is about. It's about playing the crew of a Royal Navy ship during the Napoleonic Wars.
Okay. What makes it different?
Well, there's a couple of ways that I think it's different. That it really kind of cleaves to the attempt at naval adventure very specifically. It's although it's set in a real historical period and may even include real historical people as characters if you want. It's not a historical kind of simulation, if you will. It's very much about these naval adventure stories, this genre, the fiction about the history. And so it has a few ways that it really goes about being about that genre. One of the things that it does is it models kind of the military chain of command pretty well, I think. One of the resolution systems, if you will, it's called a skirmish in the game, and it gives everyone at the table a chance to participate in this conflict and have some kind of input, whatever kind of role they would play. Their character can do something to add to this conflict, but ultimately the officer has the final responsibility for whether or not the conflict is a success or failure. So I really like that because it I think drives home that this is about a military setting. Another thing that's different that I really like is it has what they call missions, and there are two types of missions, and you could kind of think of these as adventures, if you will, or scenarios. So the first type is a military mission, and that's ultimately what you might think of as a scenario where the person running the game, the GM, has a military mission that they want your crew to go accomplish. But then each character comes up with personal missions, things they want to accomplish, whether it's woo the governor's daughter or, try and smuggle some gems back to jolly old England or whatever it is. And as they do these missions, that's how they improve their character. And these personal missions are entirely up to the player, both in terms of what they want to accomplish, but in also of kind of proposing and framing scenes to accomplish that. So those personal missions are a way that it further ties into this genre of naval adventure. It's not just about fighting people on ships. It's kind of digging into the characters' personal lives and their relationships with their loved ones back home, or maybe some conflict with other sailors on the ship. So both of those things, I think, really, for me, set it apart from maybe playing the same sort of game with another system.
Well, I am curious. I mean, you're talking about Age of Sail and some romance, a little bit of intrigue. Why wouldn't I play this with, like, I don't know, 7C?
Well, I can tell you why I wouldn't play with 7C. The biggest reason for me is it's specifically built to run these naval adventure stories. And it actually has a lot in common. It has a sister game, if you will, called Duty and Honor, which is the same kind of adventure stories in the Napoleonic era, but they're the army. And so both of these games really zero in on a specific kind of slice of history and try and emulate the fiction about that history. So that's part of it for me, is that the Neil Gow, who wrote it, really had that in mind when he was developing this game. Is how can we make it do these things that happens in the fiction? The types of characters that you build with it are very just really seem to fit with this Napoleonic naval adventure. For me, I would pick Beat to Quarters over something else like 7C because, that's what Beat to Quarters was specifically built to do. I would certainly say that it's, my own preference in gaming tends to be more towards, what are sometimes called story games or things like that. And it certainly has some pretty strong elements that way. And so that's another reason why I would pick it over something like 7C.
Okay. Well, what's the subject of the game at the table? When people sit down to play Beat to Quarters, what are the players actually doing?
Well, typically you would have one of the players is going to be an officer on the ship. They're all crew of the same ship, and usually the captain is an NPC that either the GM has created or everybody kind of together at the table makes the captain. So one player will typically play an officer, either a lieutenant or a midshipman, excuse me, and then the rest kind of fill in other ranks as they want, whether it's the various ranks on the ship. So, and then you kind of work out what the rest of the kind of important positions on the ship are as NPCs. So as you're sitting around the table, you've got just everybody is playing someone that's on this ship, and so you might have a scene where you're battling against a storm, and the lieutenant is giving commands, and this someone else is playing just a sailor, and he's climbing the rigging to go reef the sails, and this other one's playing maybe a carpenter, and he's below deck trying to make sure that the planks aren't working loose or whatever. So you're very much doing the kinds of things that happen in the fiction, in these stories by the Hornblower stories and the Patrick O'Brian stories. You're battling the Frenchies. You're sailing and chasing Polynesian pirates, or you're trying to sneak into the harbor and blow up a battery, and one of the things that it does very well, I think, is that it allows players to play various places on this chain of command without sacrificing spotlight time. Everybody still gets to input. Everybody still gets, as much spotlight time as they want to grab for themselves, so to speak. But there's definitely still this sense of a chain of command, and I think it does that very well.
All right. So let's say you've piqued my interest in this game, and I sit down at a table to play it with you, Ryan. What would you warn me as a new player? What would you warn me about?
I guess one of the things that I've seen at my own table that I would warn a new player, that I'd warn you about, Rich, would be the way that missions work, especially your personal missions. Frankly, it's a lot of fun to toy around with them, to tinker with them, and think, oh, wow, I'm going to do this mission. I'm going to work on this personal mission of wooing the daughter, and this other mission I'm trying to smuggle the gems, and because you can have several going at one time. So you might think, well, I'm going to do a scene next where I do this thing. It's easy then. What I'm saying is it's easy to kind of get stuck at a meta level sometimes. We found it a little too easy sometimes to be tinkering around with the mechanics instead of digging in and having kind of a more in-character kind of role play. And that's my own preference, is for more of that kind of in-character role play than tinkering around with some of the mechanics. And so that would be one thing I'd warn a new player about, would be that I think there's a temptation there, because it is so much fun to play around with those things. There's a temptation to play around with them and almost to the detriment of kind of more in-depth, in-character role play.
Are you talking about mini games, or can you tease that out a little bit, Ryan? I'm curious.
Okay. Well, it was really just something I noticed occurring at my own table over the course of a couple of sessions. The way that conflicts work, first of all, is that most of the time it's a single draw of your cards. You play with playing cards, normal playing cards. Mm-hmm. And when you enter a conflict, depending on what resources you bring to the table, determines how many cards you turn over, and attempt to match the GM's card that he turns over. So it kind of all falls down to a single turn of these cards. There's not a lot of back and forth there. The whole conflict is resolved with that single turn of cards. Okay, so what we found ourselves doing, I think, was looking at our missions and going, okay, now I'm gonna do this scene where I want to do this thing, and well, I'm gonna bring these resources to bear and flip the cards, and oh, that was fun, and we just kind of almost narrated the scene in the from a I don't know, took a step back and narrated instead of having the in-character role play that I like to have. It was just very tempting to do that, because it is fun to play with the cards, and and because they can happen so quickly a lot of times. I think there's a temptation not to dig in and really kind of get into the meat of a scene, because it can be over so quickly with just the turn of the cards. I don't know. I don't know if that makes it any clearer or not.
It does, and I get where you're coming from, and I've felt that at times with other games. So I hear you. Okay, but share with me, what are some of your favorite moments at the table?
There's something that you do in Beat to Quarters that typically you want to do about every session, every other session or thereabouts, and it's called at the captain's table or at the ear of the gun deck, depending on what rank of characters are involved. And it's a scene that you have where the officers are all invited to the captain's cabin for dinner, and you play out this kind of dinner party, and one person, kind of whoever gets declares it first, kind of can say they want to bring forward some topic of conversation, and then they kind of then you have this really fun scene where everybody's talking about this topic, whether it's and we've had times where it was about one game I was in, it was about slavery, about the question of slavery, and we were all kind of trying to feel out the captain's position on slavery before kind of committing ourselves too much into one camp or another. And other times it's been about tactical questions. What's the best way to attack this kind of enemy? And so you have this kind of very much in character conversation that goes on, and then finally you make a test of the cards, and depending on how that plays out, whoever wins it can get a big bonus later on in the game that they can use if the topic of conversation comes up. And that, that was kind of a generic one I just told you about, but that happens nearly every game, and that's just a scene that's always a lot of fun. We always, if someone's character is not someone who would normally be eating at the captain's table, if they're a sailor who's not an officer or something like that, I always hand them an NPC and they join in the conversation too. So those are a lot of fun. I'm trying to think of some other specifics. It's funny, we had another very specific situation that is actually another dinner party where we had a neat conflict between two of the guys at the table that they had been invited to the governor's house for a dinner. And they each had a conflict with the same guest who was also at the table. And ultimately, it ended up with a duel, and our surgeon being wounded in the duel and being carried on a stretcher back to the ship. That was a lot of fun. The way that Beat to Quarters does the ship-to-ship combat is a lot of fun as well, and those scenes are always exciting. There's enough kind of your characters have enough control over the situation that they can kind of predict the outcome of certain actions that they take, but there's also enough of variable there that you can't always tell where those cannonballs are going to hit, and you might get some great explosion that changes the course of the whole battle. So those are always a lot of fun too.
What do you see other players loving about the game?
I really think it really works well to tap into this naval adventure genre, and that's one of the things I see other players enjoying out of it, is that it's a good fit for if you love, like I've said this several times, but if you love the Hornblower stories or the Patrick O'Brian novels, this game does a really good job, I think, of allowing you to play those same sorts of stories, and that's one of the things I see the players at my own table and other people I've played with enjoying about this game, is that as fans of the books, we get to really have, get in there and make our own stories just like Captain Aubrey's. You could relate it to one of the reasons that people would love, the Star Wars RPG, because they get to play the Jedi. This game, you get to play the Royal Navy lieutenant.
Roll for News is a bi-weekly podcast of what's new and noteworthy in tabletop RPGs. From Kickstarter and Indiegogo campaigns to new releases from small press and big publishers. Every 2 weeks, spend 15 minutes with me and we'll find out what's new as you roll for news.
The Canon Puncture Show is a proud member of the RPG Crosstalk community. Also home to great podcasts like the Sharkbone Podcast and Yellow Menace. Check us out at rpgcrosstalk.webs.com.
When you think about teaching and learning, do you recall situations like this?
Okay, class, let's start. How many of you did the reading for today? All right, good.
Well, I'm a teacher, and I know I remember moments like that. So I've decided to bring gaming into my classroom. When you play games, you learn, you read, write, you imagine, you add, subtract, you strategize, you escape, you empathize, you engage. You do all this and much more, and you do it while having fun.
Check it out.
Listen to the Ruthless Diastema Games podcast at ruthlessd.com.
Alright, so flip it around. Why do people hate this game, or why would they hate it?
One thing people might not like about Beat to Quarters is it's a little bit different paradigm of a role-playing game, in that the way your character is built is there really aren't any ability scores. You can't really roll against or test your cards against your strength to see if you can break down the door. You can't test against your strength to see if you can be faster than someone else. And that takes a little getting used to. It took a little getting used to at our own table, but it's also something I think that people who, if you like the sort of game where that is exactly the kind of things you normally are testing in a conflict, this might be a little off-putting. And I think one of the reasons that it does that, again, is it's much more about making these stories that fit into the naval adventure. So you have a set of skills you can use to do things, and you have to construct scenes in such a way that allow you to use those skills to do them, as opposed to testing your strength or your dexterity or honestly even your shooting skill. There's no firearm skill. So it's a little bit different paradigm from other role-playing games.
Cool. Well, is there anything else about the game that I missed?
I mentioned the captain's table.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I will say one of the things I really like about Beat to Quarters is the character generation is I found it to be a really excellent balance between kind of deterministic character generation, where I pick the things I want, and randomness. That's actually something I would encourage a new player checking out Beat to Quarters to take a look at, is that there's actually a table in the appendix for when you're making your character. It's kind of an optional rule in Beat to Quarters to use this table at a certain stage in character generation to see what you get, and you just flip cards and it tells you kind of what you get. And I recommend that because that table is about what your prior experiences are. And I love it because it's broad enough that you can make up your own kind of interpretations, but at the same time it's specific enough to kind of give you a hook to hang something on. So it might say, you were involved in a fleet action, and then you can decide whether it was, the Battle of Copenhagen or Battle of the Nile or, one of the other battles. And then, it says you come up with a result that says you were on shore for a certain time. And you have to interpret that as to why you were on shore. I really love that in the character generation, and I had my players at the table do it as well. And, it really gave us right off the bat some fun things to think about as we're making our characters, to already start thinking about these personal missions, to already start developing these relationships that are actually part of your character too, are these relationships you have with people and institutions. And so that's one more thing I would say to someone new. It's not so much to look out for, but to encourage you to try the optional character generation.
Neat. Oh, that's pretty exciting. All right. Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you coming on to talk to us about Beat to Quarters.
Well, thanks for giving me the chance. I I really love this game, and I'd love for it to get some more attention. So thank you very much.
We had such potential, such promise, but we squandered our gifts, and so I am creating you.
You've just listened to an episode of the Canon Puncture Show. This show is copyright 2012 under Creative Commons. Find out more about us at canonpuncture.com. You can email us feedback at canonpuncture@gmail.com or catch us on Twitter. We also have Canon Puncture communities on Facebook and Google+. And of course, you can always catch us on RPG Crosstalk, which is where we keep our forum. Thanks for listening. So what do you think beat to quarters means?
Nothing.
You don't think it means anything?
Nothing.
Well, what if it means money? Is it about money?
No.
You think it has to do with fighting?
It's nothing.
It's nothing. It's not
You
nothing.
made up that word.
I didn't make up beat to
Yes,
quarters.
you did.
Uh-uh.
Yes, you did.
No, it has to do with naval battles. You're telling a joke? Okay.
Why'd you have to say that? You just ruined the surprise for everyone. It was a joke that it meant nothing.
Oh, that was the joke part?
Mm-hmm. So you ruined it.
Oh. That's a bummer.
Yeah.
So Beat the Quarters is a game about naval battles. Like on ships.
I wanna play it. I wanna play it for my whole life. I'm in love with Beat the Quarters.
What do you love about it?
I love fighting.
What else?
Fighting.
That's it? Just fighting?
Mm-hmm.
Man, you're tough.
That's another one.
Oh, that's another joke?
Why? You just ruined it again.
Oh.
Mm. That's a joke too. You keep saying, I keep saying, you ruined it. That's a joke.
Okay. I think we're done.